Like a ton of you all know, the Nigerian state gained their independence on the 1st day of October 1960. Tafawa Balewa became Prime Minister and Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe became ceremonial president. Now, although this was the pilot self-governing administration of the Nigerian state, the Tafawa Balewa's regime was riddled with a lot of political turbulence, ranging from the bloody factional wars between Samuel Akintola on one hand and Chief Awolowo on the other hand. We had the population census, which caused a lot of riot and violence in the Nigerian state between 1962 and 1963. We had the Thief uprising, which literally lasted up until 1966 when the military took over power, and we had the 1964 general election that was characterized by high levels of rigging, high levels of ballot theft, and overall corruption. On the 15th of January 1966, the first coup was staged and it was led by Major Ojukwu Kaduna. That same year, on the 29th of July, a counter coup was staged by Muritala Muhammad and Theophilus Danjuma. Now, this goes to reveal that as at the 30th of May 1967, when Colonel Chukwuemeka Ojukwu declared the Republic of Biafra, the Nigerian state was far from being homogeneous, harmonious, and united. And before we proceed any further, it's imperative to note that this is primarily an attempt to understand the Nigerian Civil War from the Biafran's perspective. So questions like, was secession necessary? Were there alternative routes the Easterners could have taken aside seceding? Was it Ojukwu's ego that triggered the war and led to the prolongation of it? Or were there other underlying factors that contributed to the cause of the war? Was the war a war in itself between two parties? Or was it a genocide against the Easterners, as it has been believed by the Easterners? Last but not least, was Ojukwu a coward? Was Ojukwu a coward? All of this will be examined in this episode, and enjoy, I guess. For the Easterners, secession was the last resort, and it was viewed as equally very important and necessary at a particular point in time. But to properly understand their standpoint, one must first understand what instigated secession, what triggered secession. How did the once reported pro-Nigerian Eastern region suddenly want to secede? Did the Easterners wake up one fine afternoon and say to their counterparts, "Hey, your family and friends, we are going to secede today"? Or were they triggers that probably contributed to and influenced their decision to want to secede? Now, the primary reason for secession was the massacres of the Easterners in the northern region. This triggered a chain of reactions that led first to secession and then degenerated into a full-blown war that lasted 3 years. Now, at this point, the Northerners were like, "Hey, you're an Easterner, you're going to die. You are going to die. Everybody's gonna die." And this stemmed from the notion that the first coup of 15 January 1966, led by Major Unzurego Chukwuma Kaduna, and the subsequent administration of Agri University, was an attempt by the Easterners to dominate and subdue their northern counterparts. For the first coup, it was claimed that it was an all-Igbo coup against northern politicians. And for Agri University's regime, it was claimed that it was a staunch Igbo man who literally only promoted like Easterners in the Nigerian state. Now, writers, reporters, correspondents that were in Nigeria before, during and after the war, especially those that supported the Eastern claim, have refuted these arguments by the Northerners. According to some of them, the first coup wasn't an Igbo coup but an all-party coup. They argued that in the South, for instance, when Ife Ejuna led the coup, he was accompanied by Major Ademo Boyega, who was a Yoruba man from the Western region. When the coup plotters went to these individual politicians' houses, they were accompanied by northern troops. Furthermore, they argued that, for instance, when Unzuregu visited the northern barracks, I think during this period still, he was accompanied by Major Azam Usman Katsina, who was the son of the Emir of Katsina. And it was reported that they came out all smiles, all smiling, like everything was alright. It's also argued that if indeed this coup was an Igbo coup against like the North, how come the coup was ended by Igbo personnel in the presence of Agri University and Colonel Ojukwu, Agri University in the south and Colonel Ojukwu in the north, especially in Kano State? Last but not the least, They repeated the claim that the coup was only targeted at northern politicians by arguing that by the time Nigeria gained their independence in 1960, political office positions were literally given to the North. It is argued that the first election that appointed Tafawa Balewa was equally rigged in favor of the North. So it wasn't necessarily focused on killing just northern politicians, but it was focused on killing corrupt politicians who simultaneously at that particular point in time were northerners. They also argued that the claim that it was only northerners is kind of false because persons like Chief Okotebo was an Easterner. Samuel Akintola was a Yoruba man. Some personnel, some army officers, for instance, out of I think about 8 of them that were killed, about 4 were northerners, I think about 2 were westerners, and about I think 2 were easterners or something. So it wasn't necessarily directed at the northerners. Also, they argued that if indeed these guys say, okay, you killed the Saldana of Sokoto, for instance, in the person of Amadou Bello, you killed Tafawa Balewa, how come there wasn't an immediate reaction, an immediate negative reaction? Because typically I feel like if you kill somebody I reference, I would react negatively. There will be riots, uprisings, and all of that. Instead, it's recorded that there was cheering and celebration all over the country that yes, indeed, these guys, these corrupt politicians, were finally dead. How come all of that did not happen at that particular point in time? How come they had to wait 4 months, 4 good months before they revenged the death of these individuals? For Aguiyi Irosi's regime, it was argued that he was a staunch Igbo man that literally just promoted Easterners and all of that. Now let's analyze the regime, right? When he was relinquished power in 1966, the very first thing he did was to appoint military governors. So in the north it was Lieutenant Colonel Azam Usman Katsina. In the east it was Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu. In the west it was Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi. In the midwest it was Lieutenant Colonel Ejo. After that, he instituted the Supreme Military Council, which was a 9-man council. Aside himself, there were only 2 Easterners in that council. First was an Igbo man, Colonel Ojukwu. Second was a non-speaking Igbo man from Rivers State, known as Lieutenant Colonel Korobo. In the Executive Council too, it was made up of members of the Supreme Military Council and 6 others. Out of those 6 others, only 2 were Easterners. The persons of the Attorney General of the Federation, known as Mr. Onyuike, who was an Igbo man, and the Inspector General of Police, known as Mr. Edet, who was an Efik man. When appointing permanent secretary, it was recorded that he distributed 23 jobs thus. 8 northerners, 7 westerners, 5 midwesterners, 3 easterners. When giving out positions in public corporations with reference to chairman positions, secretaries, and all of that, he distributed 25 jobs thus. 12 westerners, 6 northerners, 3 easterners, 1 midwesterner, 3 foreigners. Also, to further prove that he was literally pro-Nigerian, he made some appointments that revealed that he was actually pro-Nigerian. For instance, he appointed Lieutenant Colonel Yakubu Gowon as his chief of army staff. He appointed Malam Amzad Adamu as his private secretary. In fact, it's recorded that his entire entourage, most of them were individuals from the northern region. With reference to the claim that he only promoted, in the army for instance, he only promoted the Easterners, it has been argued that by the time Nigeria gained independence in 1960, the individuals in the south compared to the north were much more educated. Now, to get to several positions in the Nigerian army, you must have a level of education, and that favored the Easterners. So at that particular point in time, the Easterners got to those positions by merit. So if indeed Aguiyi Ironsi was pro-Igbo and a staunch Igbo man, doesn't all of this refute those claims? However, one major problem and one major issue Aguiyi Ironsi had to tackle at that particular point in time was the future constitution of Nigeria. In a press conference in February, he argued that The previous administration, the previous republic, had issues with the government, primarily probably because of like the fact that it was like it was based on regionalism and all of that, and there was no central authority. So he now said that okay, he will put in place a central authority so that certain things can be in place before government is handed over to civilian government or civilian authority or whatever it's called. But that caused an uproar in the north. That was literally what instigated the first massacre on the 29th of May 1966. But when you look at the decree that he made on the 24th of May 1966, you would realize that it really wasn't different from what was already in place. That is, legislative and executive powers were in the Supreme Military Council. All the decree did was to formalize that, right? So fine, that caused an uproar, like I said, in the north, and then it started from like student demonstrations in Kano State, and then it degenerated into massacres of the easterners in the north, in Kano State. So from it being like a student demonstration, armed thugs surrounded the streets from like the city walls to the Sabongaris where the easterners lived. It was massacres, killings, rapes, maims, name it. So it spread from Kano to Zara to Kaduna and to other places. And at the end of the massacre, it was revealed that about 3,000 easterners died. This caused an uproar. Some of them fled. Now at this point, this led to like secessionist demands in the northern region. They were like, yo fam, it seems as though these guys want to dominate us, so we're going to go. We are going to go. So they bombarded like their emir palaces and told them that either they stop the unification decree or they assist them. Right? The emirs, Association of Emirs, then sent a letter to Aguiyi telling him that they told him, see guy, it's either you stop the unification decree or we're going to secede, according to what the Northerners the ultimatum Northerners had given them. Aguiyi responded to their letter and told them that really it really wasn't different from the status quo. It really wasn't different from what was already in place. It was just to enable like the army to be able to function properly, because they're already used to like a central commanding whatever it's called, and they needed that kind of government to function properly. And they also went further to explain that no major decision would take place without a referendum in all the regions. And at this point, it seemed as if like the emirs were all right with what he said and everything was good. In fact, so reported that in June that same year, when the emir of Kano visited the University of Nsukka in Enugu State, Ojukwu publicly admonished the Easterners that they should please return to their regions, the northern regions and all of that, to their jobs and to their houses and to their properties. That they should see the massacres in May as a price they had to pay for the unification of Nigeria, for the further strengthening of the unification of Nigeria. Now this one, everybody thought that, oh, everything is good now, Abi, we're good to go. What a joke. On the 29th of July 1966, counter coup was staged by Muri Salam Mohammed and Theophilus Danjuma. Now at this point, the counter coup had two demands. One, they wanted to secede. It was known as Operation Araba. Araba in Hausa means secession. So the primary purpose of the counter coup was first to secede, and then to retaliate like against like the killings of the northern politicians that died during the first coup. Now, just like all over Nigeria, the barracks, garrison and all of that, the system was the same. What happened was that the northern troops took over the armory, armed themselves, gathered their eastern counterparts, paraded them, and shot them at the parade ground. And it was reported that about 300 soldiers were either killed or unaccounted for. This caused an uproar in the eastern region. Now, during that period, Yakubu Gowon was then appointed governor of the Nigerian states by the northern coup plotters actually. Now at this point, I think we should note that with reference to the secessionist demand, it didn't go any further than that, because its report as is that the British intervened and told them that, guys, this cannot work. You can't leave these guys, because aside the fact that there was a Cold War going on between the United States on one hand and Russia on the other hand, there was also like a war going on in the Middle East called the Arab-Israeli War. And one particular one was the Yom Kippur War of 1963, and that influenced like the flow of oil from Middle Eastern countries to the United States and to Britain. And at that point, oil was discovered in Nigeria. So they already gave the relinquished power to the North, and so they literally like control the Northerners, and that's the truth. And so they were like, guys, this cannot work. You can't succeed. You get me? So eventually their demands like that did not go anywhere. And then Yakubu Gowon was appointed like the head of the Nigerian state. Now, on the 1st of August 1966, Nigeria had two de facto systems of government. One in the north, the central government, the Midwestern region, and the other in the east, headed by Colonel Ojukwu. So literally, Ojukwu did not accept Yakubu Gowon's regime because there was no meeting. All the regions did not like reach a consensus that this is our leader. Do you understand? He was just appointed by one fraction, and that caused an issue. So Ojukwu did not accept that. But it was reported that although he did not accept this, he understood that the only reason or the only way the Nigerian state can remain the Nigerian state was for the parties involved to meet up and find a solution to the association of states at that particular point in time. So on the 9th of August 1966, there was a meeting by all parties involved, and it was agreed in this meeting that soldiers, all the troops, should be repatriated to their various regions. So soldiers from the north, from the west, for instance, that were northerners, should move back to the north. That's in the east, should move back to the north. The easterns in other places should move back to the eastern region. Now, while Ojukwu did that in the east, for instance, all the northern-born troops were repatriated to their various regions. They were actually given arms and ammunition so that they can protect themselves from being waylaid on the road to their region. The troops in the north were not repatriated. The argument was that they did not have troops like Yoruba. That was true actually. There wasn't Yoruba troops. But then there wasn't like any chaos at that particular point in time. But once it have made sense if they had just repatriated them, and then like further solutions to the issues would have like been found or something. But that didn't happen. They said these guys did not have troops, so the northern troops remained in the western region. But the eastern troops in other parts, some of them were repatriated without arms and ammunition. But what's it called? A few of them were still left in all these places. So at this point, Ojukwu now asked that you guys should bring our guys back to our region now. You should allow them to come. And it was reported that in consequence for that request, about 22 eastern soldiers were killed at Ikeja barracks. Discussing that uproar, right? Now at this point, I think it's important to note that after the May massacre, it is said that Aguirre constituted a commission of inquiry. But before the commission sat, he told his chief of army staff, in person of Yakubu Gowon, to like do a preliminary inquiry about what happened and give him a report on all of that. And so it was reported that when the Supreme Military Council they sat, they were asking Yakubu Gowon, how far, like, what's up with this stuff? What is the report and all of that? And it was said that he avoided the question and all of that. And so when he became governor, or when he was relinquished power, the commission of inquiry was disregarded. And so there was no recompense. There was no like the people that constituted nuisance in the north. They were not brought to book. There was no compensation to the people that were affected by the killings in the north and all of that. And there was a great suspicion of Yakubu Gowon at that particular point in time. Okay, no wala. Now between July 29, 1966 and September 12th, 1966, it's reported that the Easterners had a complete turnaround. They were like, it seemed as though like trying to stay in this state that it's only going to work at all. So on the 12th of September 1966, when the ad hoc constitutional conference sat, the Easterners proposed a loose association of states that guaranteed internal autonomy to all regions. Now, it's reported that the Northerners agreed with their stance. In fact, they went further and proposed a loose federation of states and likened it to the East African Common Services Organization, which was like a confederation of states. They also reported that they went further and said that in this new Nigerian state, if any of the regions want to secede, they should be granted that opportunity to secede. Now, during that period, there was now like an issue within the northern delegation. Colonel Castana had to come from where it was in the north to Lagos, and then the delegation left Lagos. The meeting was adjourned, right? The meeting was adjourned. Then they came back, and then when they came, there was a complete turnaround. Now, the last said, no, That is centralization of authority. They want the central government. They support like creating much more states in the Nigerian state. The secession claims now it wasn't there anymore and all of that. And before they could reach like an agreement in that meeting, it was ended abruptly by another series of massacres in the northern region. So between the 18th of September 1966 and the 24th of September 1966, series of massacres happened in the northern cities of Makurdi, Minna, Boko, Gombe. We had Jos, Sokoto, Kaduna, amongst others. Easterners were brutally murdered, killed. Now at this point, as usual, the central government, the Northerners, and in extension the British High Commissioner refuted the claims. They played it down. They said it didn't happen, it wasn't that bad. Right? But there were correspondents and reporters that were eyewitnesses in the Nigerian state. And after that period, they wrote reports and all of that about what actually happened. Reporters from the Observers, Time magazine, the New York Times, and all of that were all in Nigeria reporting all of these incidences. In fact, one of them, Mr. Swaj, who was an independent journalist, claimed that what happened in the north was a pogrom of genocidal proportions. And look at how bad it was. But then, these guys, the British people, they tried to downplay that it's nothing that bad. It was just between two parties that it will probably be resolved like very soon and all of that. But that didn't happen. So by the end of the massacre, which was still happening, even when it seemed like it was the end of the massacre, about 30,000 Easterners were killed. Now, 1.5 million refugees left the north to the east. About 500 left other regions to the east. They ran for their dear lives. Now, at this point, Ojukwu was faced with another problem because there was high levels of unemployment. The healthcare services were like poor. Educational services was poor. The entire system was in shambles, literally. And so it was faced with a lot of difficulties. Now, one would think that in a sane government, it's only sensible that if a situation like this happens, you would find solutions to their problems, right? You will find ways to compensate them, for instance. Find solutions to their problems practically. But that didn't happen. There was no compensation. There was no recompense. Not one soldier was given a day's confined to the barracks. Not one officer was court-martialed. Not one civilian was jailed for their offenses. Not one police officer was arrested. Even when a lot of them were identified. Now, what started as a small murmur, like, oh, we're going to secede, now became a hurricane. No, this has to happen. Because it seemed as if the government didn't want them to leave, literally. It looked like a genocide in they saw it as a kind of a means to wipe out the eastern region. Not only because of what happened, the actual events, and the fact that about 30,000 Easterners died, but also the reaction of the government to what actually happened. So they were like, no, it's secession. But Ojukwu, as a pro-Nigerian, it was like, okay, there will probably be like a possible way that we can make this thing work. And so at that point, there was like, people were like, the two military governors should meet and then try and find solutions to the Nigerian problem. So they met at Aburi, Ghana. That was because Ojukwu didn't feel safe in Nigeria and was like, he can't meet in Nigeria. So they met at Aburi, Ghana between the 4th and the 5th of January 1967. Now at this meeting, the major issue they had to resolve was that of the form of government and the army. Ojukwu argued that at this point, let's be realistic, right? There is no way the Eastern soldiers, for instance, would stay in the same offices or the same mess with that of the Northern soldiers. There's no way they can work hand in hand. Because of the last killing, there is no way possible that the Easterners would feel safe in the hands of the Northern troops. And then it was like the only solution for now, the temporary solution, was to have separate government, separate population, separate the armed forces and all of that. Now after it was done, Castina, who went with him, that was like the military governors of other regions, Castina in the north, Ejo in the midwestern region, and this guy, what's his name, Adebayo in the west. Fajoyi died. Adebayo in the west. I agreed with him. They're like, oh, that's a very, very sound point. Because that society was like the only solution. Now, with the question of the eastern biggest problem, which was the refugees, it should agree that permanent secretaries of finance should meet within 2 weeks to find solutions to their problems, especially with reference to compensations and all of that. It was agreed though that this was what was going to happen. In reference to jobs, for instance, so agreed that civil servants and public servants, and even those that were paid per day, should receive their full payment up until the end of the financial year. It was also agreed that what is it called? With reference to properties that were left behind in the northern region, the Inspector General of Police of all regions should come together and find solutions as to how they can move those properties and all of that, probably sell them and give the money to the instance or whatever, find a solution to the problem. It was also agreed that the army should be submitted to the Supreme Military Council. And last but not least, it was agreed that future meetings should be done in a mutually agreed position, mutually agreed points in Nigeria, and that reports and articles and all of that was going to cause issues and drama should not be allowed to be published. 10 days later, the central authority or the Nigerian state at the then, let me not say Nigerian state because they had not declared the Republic of Biafra. The central authority, an article was published, basically known as Nigerian 1966, and in that article, everything that happened in 1966 with reference to the massacres and how bad it was downplayed and refuted. Like, it seemed as if it didn't happen. So Ojukwu called Yakubu Gowon. My guy, what happened? I know we agreed this is what was supposed to happen. And I think Yakubu Gowon explained there's probably a misinformation that happened. Okay, no wahala. So on the 6th of January that same year, 1967, Yakubu Gowon held a press conference. He literally just refuted everything that happened, everything that was agreed at the Aburi conference. Now it's important to note here that before the conference started, it was agreed that a complete stenographic record and tape recordings of the entire event would be given to all the people that came to the conference, and that was given. So when what's his name, Yakubu Gowon denied the entire plot, Ojukwu released those publications, and it revealed that Gowon was actually lying. Before Ojukwu died in 2011, he granted an interview with the Nigerian Television Authority (NTA), where he explained the side of the Aburi conference story. Have a listen.
At Aburi, yes, we agreed on area commands for the armed forces. At Aburi, we agreed that the police force would be decentralized. We agreed on those. Yes. We agreed even to show that we didn't separate. At Aburi, we also agreed on certain revenue formula. That's what happened at Aburi. Aburi again, because I always end up, it sounds odd today, but I always end up by saying I must have been naive, because I believed actually that would be the end. I'll confess to you, when I got back to Enugu, oh yes, I had a party, believing that probably the danger was over. That's what we thought. Until they then began to deny everything. It was the denial of Nigeria that made me publish the tapes of Aburi, because we had insisted that each one should have a set of tapes. Everybody talks about confederation. Go and look at the transcript. There is no time that the word confederation came from my lips.
So by giving a press conference where Yakubu Gowon literally denied the entire agreement at Aburi conference, the popular slogan in the news became "On Aburi we stand." In fact, Ojukwu stated that he would not attend any further meeting of the Supreme Military Council until the agreements at Aburi are implemented. February that year, he held a press conference at Enugu where he stated that if by the 31st of March the agreements are not implemented, right, you will have no other choice than to ensure they are implemented in the Eastern region. So the federal government now responded with Decree number 8, which at first glance literally like seemed as if it had like provisions of the Aburi Conference, especially with reference to internal autonomy of the regions. But when you look at it again, you realize that there are extra provisions that literally like reduce the entire paragraph to nothing. So provisions like, for instance, one paragraph stated that the regional government should not do anything that would impede or prejudice the central authority. That's fine. But then it was still up to the central authority to determine what was prejudicial. Another paragraph said that the central government can take power or control over any region once they determine that those regions are endangering to the continuance of the central government. Again, it was up to Lagos, it was up to the central government to determine what was endangering. What was the most menacing of all to the Easterners was the fact that was the paragraph that stated that a state of emergency can be declared in any region with the agreement of 3 of the military governors. Now, considering the fact that a state of emergency usually comes with sending in of troops, and the reality on ground that the other 3 military governors were either northerners or they were governed states but had northern troops, the Easterners saw it as being one-sided and they did not accept the decree. And let's fast forward to the beginning of May 1967. Yakubu Gowon deemed it fit to impose a partial blockade in the East, especially with reference to communication. So postal services, telex services, telephone services, cables, all of that were impeded. Now, this literally like cut off communications between like the eastern region and the outside world. Furthermore, the Nigerian Airways was banned from entry and exit, so they could not enter and they could not exit the eastern region. But 7th of May 1967, Ojukwu was visited by Sir Adetokunbo Ademola and Chief Awolowo in order to ask him, okay, what exactly do you want from the government? What exactly is it that you want? And he has actually been stating all of this, but in that meeting he reiterated the fact that it's easy. All you have to do is to, for now, because of the sanctions, remove economic sanctions from the eastern region, and also repatriate troops, just as it had been agreed since like 9th of August the previous year. Repatriate troops to their various regions and all of that. So Adetokunbo and Awolowo gave recommendations to Yakubu Gowon, who on the 20th of May formally accepted that. But in reality, those agreements or those recommendations were not adhered to. So the clamor in the East intensified. By the 26th of May 1967, the 335 Council of Constitutive Assembly of Elders and Chiefs and all of that in the Eastern region met and gave Ojukwu a unanimous mandate. They said, Ojukwu, see, if you do not declare this region a republic, free and sovereign, we will literally like impeach you, or literally like not put you out there again to represent the Easterners. Because at this point, Ojukwu was in between, was like in a dilemma, should I or should I not? And so they gave the unanimous mandate. This was interpreted as being like an open challenge to secede. So 27th of May, Gowon declared a state of emergency, right? He declared a state of emergency. He declared the creation of 12 states. So the eastern region was divided into 3 separate regions, 3 separate states that had like no authority and all of that. He reimposed economic sanctions, and then he gave himself full power, full authority over the Nigerian state. 30th of May 1967, the Republic of Biafra was declared. Now, do you think seceding or secession then was necessary? Was it important? Considering what the Easterners went through, aside the massacres that happened in 66, the massacres that happened in 1966, so like May and September, aside the thousands of Easterners that died, that lost their lives in the massacres, the reaction of the government of Britain, of the world, to the massacres, making it seem as if it did not happen, the further sanctions, the fact that there were no recompense, there was no compensation, nobody was brought to book. The fact that it seemed as if these guys were out for the necks of the Easterners, and nobody was doing anything about it. Do you think, with all of this, do you think it was wrong, it was senseless for the Easterners to have seceded? Do you? So after the Republic of Biafra was declared, explanations as to what led to the breakaway were postulated, and one of those explanations was that it was Ojukwu's revolt, quote unquote, an attempt by a few army officers with a number of civilian politicians to create a rebel state, motivated by personal greed and love for power. But then writers, have refuted these claims. Some of them noted that if indeed Ojukwu wanted power and ego and prestige and all of that, he knew the routes to take, because it was very clear during that time that Nigerian politics was very easy. It was all about loyalty. And he was one that had that poise and acumen, and he had good standing with a lot of politicians and lots of army officers then. And so if indeed it was what he wanted, he could have easily proven loyalty to Gowon, supported Gowon's claim, ignored the killings and the massacres of the Easterners, ignored the council of the advisory, the committee of elders and chiefs, ignored all of that, and then retained his governorship, because he was still military governor, retained the military governorship, and he would have had all the power and the prestige he wanted. If it was actually his ego, that would have happened, right? But he didn't do that. Furthermore, if he wanted power, if indeed it was against the Northerners, for instance, like he wasn't like as pro-Nigerian as people have said he was, and then he wanted power, he could have breathed this time, ignored what had happened, right? Breathed this time, gotten like Southern governors, that of the West, that of the Midwest. He had great standing with those guys. Gotten the governors to, side with him, plot a coup, take over power. If indeed that was what he wanted. But it wasn't. Now there's this misconception that Ojukwu was the voice of the Biafrans, but it really wasn't. The voice of the Biafrans were the consultative assembly and the advisory council of the elders and the chiefs. At that point there were 365. So he literally just listened to their pleas, listened to their cries. He understood what they were going through, saw things from their perspective, and then, because he was the face of the Eastern region and he was the tactical commander or whatever, he was the one that had to do like the negotiation and all of that. He was military governor, and he had to do what was right by his people. He had to do what was right by the Easterners then, because they had gone through a lot. The Aburi conference that would have literally stopped the entire thing and made it much more bearable for the Easterners was denied in its entirety. If he had not released the recording, the tape recordings that was given during the conference during that period, he would have been called a liar and said, "Oh, it didn't happen." And before you know it, it's fake news. He just put it fake news. But that didn't happen. Now the further proof that it wasn't Ojukwu's ego that instigated and prolonged the war, and that's a prolongation of it. You could see the stance of the Biafrans. Now by the time Yakubu Gowon declared 12 states, where the Eastern region was divided into 3 states. You had the Southeastern region, the East Central region, and I think the River State. He sought out Igbo people or Easterners of note to head each of the states, but nobody came forth. Nobody, not one person of note could he find. He had to look for all those individuals that were either they've never visited the region before in their entire lives, or they were disowned by their families and all of that. On that point, to prove the loyalty of the Biafrans, it wasn't necessarily Ojukwu's ego, was the fact that during the course of the war, there was high levels of suffering. The Easterners saw these things, people were dying left, right, center. They could easily have revolted. If indeed it was one man ego that instigated and led to the prolongation of it, they could have revolted and said they were not doing again, surrendered. But that didn't happen. There was not one revolt, not one crisis against what they were, because they believed in the cause. They believed that they were doing this for themselves and for the region. Because at that point, it seemed as if the government, Britain, Russia that supported the Nigerian side, Spain, they did not care about the eastern region. People died and you denied their death. You downplayed it like it did not exist. You go for a conference and then at the conference an agreement is reached and then you deny it. It seemed to them like the government did not have value for their lives, and that was why the war got to the point that it did. People were dying, but these guys kept fighting because they believed that if the government could have done something like that prior to the declaration, like prior to when they seceded, just imagine they gave up and surrendered. There's a huge probability that they will be killed and nothing would happen. Absolutely nothing. Another explanation they tried to give was that it was Ojukwu's propaganda that propelled the cause of the war. You know, it's easy to like use the media, for instance, Radio Biafra, to probably deceive a number of people, probably deceive here and there and all of that. But we had intellectuals, we had individuals that were civil servants, technicians, engineers, like people in politics, power, that literally gave up their high positions of authority to accept a far lesser one in the Biafran state, simply because they believed in the cause. So if indeed it was possible to, you know, convince the ones that are not literate enough, how about those that had the best of degrees? We had professors in support of the claim. We had doctors, lawyers, name them. And you know, Igbo people, they were the ones that were like going to school and getting educations and all of that. So if indeed it was a propaganda, you know, a man would just sit and start bringing out false news, could it have been possible to have deceived those intellectuals too? That said, do you think it was Ojukwu's ego that triggered the war and led to the prolongation of it? Do you? According to the United Nations Convention on Genocide, adopted on the 9th of December 1948, Article 2 of the Convention specifies what genocide means. According to the article, genocide means any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in part or in whole a national, racial, religious, or ethnic group, such as killing members of the group, causing physical, like bodily or mental harm to members of the group, deliberately placing the group in conditions that is intended to destroy the group in part or in whole. We had imposing measures that would like deter births in the group and forcibly moving children of the group from the group to another. Now, obviously, in times of war, there's like always killings between both parties, right? People die and all of that. But then what differentiates a genocide from like other regular killings is the phrase "with intent to destroy." With intent, there must be like an intention, right? Or some stuff. So during the course of the war and after the war, the Biafrans have had charges against the Nigerian government on issues of genocide, and their charges were based in 5 fields. The first was the pogrom of 1966 in the northern region first, then in the western region and in Lagos. The second was the behavior or the attitude of the Nigerian army to the civilian population they met during the course of the war. The third was the behavior of the Nigerian Air Force with reference to their targets. The fourth was they had specific targets, with reference to administrators, with reference to teachers, technicians, like chiefs and all of that, when they got to several other territories. Their argument is that they targeted these guys so that it will like stop the continuance of like those that are already like there and prosperous and all of that. I have like the technical know-how, the business know-how, and the educational know-how aspect. And the last is with reference to the deliberate imposition of starvation and famine on the Biafran people. Now, with reference to the first, we've spoken about the program at length, how Easterners were massacred in May 1966 and September 1966, and the fact that nothing was done about it, nobody was brought to book, no compensation, nothing at all. It seemed as if the massacre did not happen. Do you get me? And that in law can be seen as condoning the act. So it's like, I am not accepting this, but I'm accepting this. You're saying, oh, this is it, this is bad, or you're not physically accepting it, but because your actions afterwards proves that you actually did accept those things. The second is the behavior of the Nigerian army on the civilian population, especially with respect to the Midwest killings. So by late September, the Biafran forces left the Midwestern region because of Banjo's, traitor vibes. And so they left the Midwestern region, and then they got back to Enugu in order for Banjo to carry out his act of assassinating Ojukwu and bring it to the end of the war. That is the story for another day. But then it said that after the troops left the Midwestern region, the 2nd Division of the Nigerian Army, led by Muritala Mohammed, came in there like multiples and literally like killed armless civilian and Igbos and Easterners in Asaba, Benin. We have Abbo, we had Sapele, all those Midwestern places, Calabar, and all of those towns. They were killed. The argument they posited then was that they could not differentiate between the soldiers and the civilians, so they literally like killed anybody, all sorts of stuff. So Western news channels recorded all of these events. For the Washington Morning Post on the 27th of September 1967, they said that the northern troops killed about 500 Igbo people in Benin City after a house-to-house search. Also, the New York Times on the 10th of January 1968 stated that the northern troops either killed or stood by and watched as the mobs killed about 5,000 Igbos in Sapele, Agbo, Benin, and Asaba. The London observers in January, I think 21st of January to 1968, noted that the greatest of all massacres happened in Asaba, where 700 Igbo males were lined up and executed. They were lined up and executed. Now, the killings of the Igbos were not just restricted to like Igbos themselves. They got to Efiks, Calabars, and all of that. It's reported by the New York Times on the 18th of January 1968 that when the federal troops took over a port in Calabar, they killed about 1,000 to 2,000 Igbos, most of which were civilians. This continued in the 3rd Division of the Nigerian Army, led by Colonel Adekunle, which was popularly referred to as Colonel P. Ellington Mahmoud. They said that when he crossed the Imo River and tried to like get to the river basin, about 300 Igbos were killed. 200 to 300 Igbos were killed, as reportedly. Also, it's reported that in March 1968, about in Umaya, about 300 apostolic faith church members were dragged out from their churches and publicly executed. Now, it goes to reveal the stance of I say the northern troops, because you could have literally targeted barracks, where the Biafran soldiers actually were with the guns, targeted them and then killed them. But instead, you targeted harmless civilians that were going about their daily businesses and you killed them. This is why the Biafrans argue that the intent of these guys during the war was to wipe out the eastern region and not necessarily fight the war. In reference to the behavior of the Nigerian Air Force with reference to like specific targets, it is reported that instead of targeting barracks and railroads and bridges that Biafran soldiers were at, with their machine guns ready to fight, they targeted places like hospitals and anything that had the Red Cross. They targeted marketplaces, they targeted churches, they targeted close-knitted towns. And it's reported that, for instance, at Agbu Market on the 17th of February 1968, an estimated number of 103 Easterners died in less than a minute from an explosion. In Aguilera, in October 1968, it's reported that 510 people were killed in one of those air raids too. In Umaya, it is reported that 100 Igbo people and about 300 Igbo people were injured in December 1968. Now, the majority of those people that died were women, children, or women with children strapped to their backs. Again, the Biafrans argue, why not target the barracks? Why not target, places that air raids, right? Target Ojukwu's residents. Target places that, you get me? The Biafran soldiers were well equipped with their guns and all of that, but no, you didn't do that. You then targeted harmless women and children and left them for dead. With reference to selective killings in some conquered regions, it's reported that mainly by the Biafrans, this is mostly Biafrans accounts, that in areas like Uyo, Anang, Ibibio, Brass, Boni, Ugep, we had Ogoni, Sapeleya, and some other places. The chiefs, teachers, technicians, administrators, those that have specific degrees that would if for instance the Easterners leave, eventually secede, right? They would have the capability to be able to build Biafra from scratch. So those guys were targeted and killed. Now, the last but not the least, the position of the Biafrans with reference to genocide is reference to starvation. The deliberate attempts by the Nigerian side to starve. They imposed starvation on the Biafrans, and this affected mainly women and children, and not necessarily the men that had much more strength. So women and children, about 500,000 of those died from starvation and its attendant diseases. Question is, does all of this prove intent? Because none of these things that were done had it's easier to prove intent when there's a written statement and you're okay, this is what these guys wanted, or Yakubu Gowon goes on the press and say this is it, they're going to die. But none of that happened, but yet these things happened. So then the argument on the other side is that you can't prove intent, that was what they intended to do, that those guys that carried out all of those things were rogues and all of that did things by themselves. The Biafrans now argue, okay, say for instance, I live very close to a magnificent building, and then because the building blocks the ray of sunlight into my apartment, I am pissed. I'm okay, what can I do to stop the situation? So I decided to burn down the building. So I hatched my plan, connected all the wires, disconnected whatever I needed to disconnect, knowing fully well that usually when the time I decided to burn down the building, thousands of people are usually in the building. I ignored all of that and I went on with my plan. Eventually, the building burned to the ground, and the individuals in the building died as a result. Now I go to the law court and I say, my intent was to burn down the building and not necessarily kill the individuals in it. That is exactly how the Biafrans saw the position of Gowon and the British, because the British largely supported, or Britain largely supported, the Nigerian side. You see these people dying of starvation. You see these people. You see that they are targeted. They are selected targets. You see the behavior of the armed forces, the army, and all of that. But yet you do absolutely nothing about it. And then you claim that you have no bad intentions towards the Easterners. You have no bad intentions towards like the leadership, and you are literally just doing something or doing things to try to coerce these people to surrender. But they saw it, the Easterners saw it as a means to wipe them out. Another way they tried to prove intent was like commentaries that were all around like the country during that period. For instance, remember that the policeman in Lagos mentioned something about they're going to kill these guys and all of that. There were side comments here and there and all of that. Although that can't be said to be like Gowon's position. But then on the one of the side comments was a reference to Radio Kaduna. It is reported that the chant used as like the jingle of the radio was translated from Hausa to English, and it literally was just painted a graphic picture of what their intentions were. So it was like, we're going to pillage their lands, we're going to rape their women folk, kill their men folk, cause them to suffer, and then put an end to what was started in 1966, which was the Pogrom Massacre. Massacres. That said, I ask again, do you think the war was a war in itself, or was it a genocide against the Easterners? Do you think the previously listed meaning of genocide, like killing members of the group, causing bodily or mental harm, deliberately imposing sanctions, for instance, like that of starvation, to destroy in part or in whole, forcibly removing children from the group to another, and literally like putting a stop to birth? Do you think all of this proves that the war between 1967 and 1970, I would say 66 because the program was 66, and 1970 was a war in itself, or do you think it was a genocide against the Easterners? On the question of whether Ojukwu was a coward, the argument usually is you started the war, you had the mind, you had the willpower to start the war, and then eventually you allowed people to die, women, children, men folk to die anyhow, and then you ran for your dear life. This is based on the misconception that Ojukwu was the one that started the war. Like one man, like I mentioned earlier, whether it was Ojukwu's ego that triggered the war. One man decided to just fight because he doesn't have any other thing to do with himself now, just to fight. But the reality is that it was an instruction by the Eastern region. So they're like, this can't happen anymore. All of these killings happened. Nobody said or did anything. There was no recompense, nothing at all. It seemed as if it did not happen. The Abure conference that would have ended the entire thing was denied to a fault. How can you just deny something that had recording, for Christ's sake? There was tape record, there was proof, but then you deny the entire thing that it did not happen. And then it seemed to the Easterners that these guys they did not have value for their lives as Easterners, and then there was it's time to secede, it's time to go our separate ways, because it seemed like irrespective of anything that happens, we will still be the target. And so they gave Ojukwu the mandate to secede because he was the military governor of the Eastern region. He didn't just wake up one fine afternoon and say he wanted to secede. He was instructed to secede. Furthermore, Furthermore, during the course of the war, like I mentioned earlier, most of the individuals that died were like civilians. Ojukwu had zero control over those because it was like the plot of the northern troops to literally like kill, like the argument of genocide. They targeted specifics and the issue of malnutrition, the starvation, and all of that. So that in itself caused a number of deaths. It wasn't Ojukwu's fault that all of that happened. It was literally just a messenger, and people don't see it like that. They see it like it was one man that woke up and said, "We're going to secede. Nothing wants to happen. We're too proud as Igbo people. You know, our pride has to be intact." All of that. But that didn't happen. There were times and times that all of this could have ended. It should have not degenerated into a war. If the Aburi Conference, for instance, if the agreements were implemented, if something was done about it, trust me, it wouldn't have gotten to that point. But then it was obvious that these guys, the Nigerian side, the British people, they were not serious about the Easterners, and that was why these Eastern people decided to secede. With reference to like the fact that he fled, should have died, should have stayed and died. Like I mentioned, it took instructions. The only instruction I did not take from the chiefs and elders was those of tactics. You know, he was a military man, so he went to school and he knew how to be tactical and all of that. And so on the 10th of January, they met again to discuss the course of like the Biafran state, and to say that in that meeting, it was decided that he should flee. They told him that it's to stay and die will make no sense, like be futile. To stay and then be pursued through the bushes would cause much more problem to the Biafran people. So it was the best in the interest of the Biafran state to flee, right? So writers argue that that was the major reason Ojukwu fled, in order that the war comes to an end. Because they noted that if he had stayed, the probability of the war ending was very minimal. The Biafrans would still have fought, but the fact that the face of the armed forces, the tactical face of the Biafran soldiers was not there anymore. It was easier for the Biafrans to surrender because they were out of arms, they were out of ammunition, you get me? So Ojukwu fled to Ivory Coast, and 24 hours later, Brigadier General F. Young surrendered the Biafran state to the Nigerian forces. This led to the end of the war on the 15th of January 1970. Gowon declared no victor, no vanquished, and instituted the three R's of reconciliation, rehabilitation, and reconstruction.
Miri ozuzo, zachapu iyo